sends to you compliments. Republic Bank, we're the one for you. Classic Lighting, Budget Marine Grenada, and Spicer Imaging Center.
And welcome to the start of Season 2 of Our Climate Reality. In Season 1, we focused on developing our understanding of climate change and how it affects us and impacts a range of activities and economic sectors, including water, agriculture, tourism, health, and extreme events, to name a few. Season 2 will focus on the solutions. What we can do to reduce climate change impacts across our various sectors and in our individual lives, emphasizing on current initiatives being undertaken in addressing the challenges from climate change and highlighting opportunities for getting involved in climate change-related actions. We have introduced 2 new features into the program. The first will be a segment called This Week in Climate, where we will review major developments around the world in climate change and explain what is happening and the causes. This feature will be hosted by the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. The second is to provide you, our viewers and listeners, the opportunity to ask questions and to provide feedback. And we will dedicate 10 minutes of each program to our open line. We begin Season 2 with a program on the heat that we've been experiencing over the last few weeks. We will look at the cause, the risk it presents, and what is being done in response, as well as how we can protect ourselves under these conditions. Our program tonight, Coping with the Heat, Risks and Responses. Our guests, Dr. Shawn Charles, Dr. Lindonne Telesford, Dr. Nyoni Winchester, and our special feature by Dr. Cedric van Meerbeeck from the CIMH. From our program this evening, we hope that you can understand the causes of heat waves that have been experienced, risks and impacts of heat waves on public health, health impacts that are directly intensified by climate change, of course, focusing on the results from studies in here in Grenada, programming that are in place to cope with health risks, including guidance for different types of activities, and additional programming needed to cope with current and future high risk. Also, recommended heat thresholds and adaptation measures for Grenada, and what we can do to protect ourselves. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll introduce our guests and our new feature, This Week in Climate Change. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Our environment is our responsibility. Budget Marine contributes by selling environmentally friendly products. For example, we sell lightweight open boats that require a relatively small engine. Best to combine with our Tohatsu 4-stroke engines. They use little fuel and have a low emission. Carib Marine solar panels are specially made to withstand the Caribbean climate. The panels are suitable for use at home and on the boat. The required chargers and converters are also available from Budget Marine. Keeping your car and boat clean extends the lifespan. But residues of the cleaning products disappear in nature. We at Budget Marine sell eco-friendly cleaning products from EcoWorks, not harmful to nature and also clean very well. Plastic junk in our oceans is a major problem. Fortunately, there are companies that clean up and reuse the plastic into usable products. Marlowe, manufacturer of lines and ropes, produces docking lines made out of plastic waste. Another company is Sperry Shoes. Sperry has a collection made from used fabrics and plastic waste. Just a few examples of how we at Budget Marine contribute to help protecting our environment. We care.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. We going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
For when you need someone to help you to your feet, I'll be that beacon to your highest peak. Oh, I'll be right next to you, no, I will never leave. Come on, take my hands, we got everything we need. Cause you can look to me, yes, I can. Whenever you're in need, yes, just call on me and I'll be on my way. I'll be by your side, never to divide, to life that shines our way. Wherever your road leads, we'll be right there with you. Wherever your road leads, we'll make your dreams come true. Next time, next time, next time, next day, oh.
Nexa Credit Union, with you wherever your road leads.
Welcome back, everyone, and of course a special good night to all our viewers of GBN Television 711, our listeners on K105 FM, and of course our friends on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. We thank you for joining us, and of course we trust that you would get insightful information that can help you, or help us rather, in our fight against climate change. What we're going to do now is to ask our guests just to take 30 seconds to introduce themselves, and we'll start, of course, with Dr. Shawn Charles. Dr. Charles.
Thank you, and good night to you, good night to my fellow panelists, and good night to the viewing and listening audience. As was stated earlier, my name is Shawn Charles. I am the Acting Chief Medical Officer in the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Religious Affairs.
Thank you very much, Dr. Telesford.
Thank you, Godfrey, for having me on tonight. So I'm Dr. Lindonne Telesford, and I am an associate professor at St. George's University, also an assistant dean at the university. Climate change is one of the areas that I have been focusing on in my teaching responsibilities at the university. So I'm quite happy to be here tonight and to share with our audience.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Nyoni Winchester?
Hi, good night, everyone. I am Nyoni Winchester, veterinarian by profession. And tonight, most importantly, the role that I'm playing is that I'm the fellow for the Climate Change Health Leadership Program, which is basically a UE-led, EU-funded program that serves to inspire capacity building in the area of climate change and health leadership. And so I'm very honored to be a part of this panel group and I look forward to a fruitful discussion tonight.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do now, folks, we'll go over to Dr. Cedric van Meerbeeck for our feature, This Week in Climate, looking at understanding the causes and consequences of heat waves.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on this show. It's a pleasure to be back. My name is Cedric van Meerbeeck. I'm a climatologist with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and it is my distinct pleasure to be able to tell you a little bit about why we've been feeling so hot in the recent weeks and months. And in fact, tell you a little bit more about how this is not just in Grenada or in Barbados, where the CIMH, or Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, is located, but actually across the Caribbean, across the North Atlantic Ocean bordering lands, and actually across the world. So let's go over a few things that we need to look at that can highlight why it is that we've been feeling hot this year. So if you look at the image in front of you, what you will see is that in the Caribbean, we can characterize our seasons into 4 distinct types of seasons. One, which is the most well-known, is called the hurricane season. Now, as you know, officially it runs from June the 1st up until November. In many of the Caribbean countries, we have the wet season. We also know that the rest of the year is the dry season. But there's another type of season that we haven't been familiarized with very much up until recently, if at all, and that is what we now call the Caribbean heat season. Now, this heat season can be characterized as the time of the year when we have more heat waves or frequent heat waves in some years, and also higher temperatures on average. Around September, which is when you can see the darkest colors occur in terms of the frequency of excessive heat. August and September is also when our humidity levels go up quite a lot. And so September tends to be the hottest month, at least the way we feel in terms of how humid and hot the conditions are. If we focus a little bit closer to home, now this is a slide that looks at Barbados specifically, and temperatures as they have been evolving during the daytime at the weather station that CIMH maintains. So that is right in our backyard. It was a little bit warmer throughout the year on average in the last year than it is historically, but if you compare that to this year so far, and we have temperatures plotted here up until August, what we've seen is that there have been, for instance, 35 days with temperatures above 32 degrees, which is not very common. Actually, last year, the 2 warmest days in Barbados only reached 32 degrees, and the rest of the time was actually cooler. If you look at this red line, you can see how much hotter this year has been. And maybe more important, we've been feeling hot not just because temperature is hot, as I said, but also the humidity has been high. And so even though the temperatures typically this month during the daytime have been hovering around the maximum of 32, 33 degrees, the feels-like temperature, or what we really feel is the heat, is closer to 35 to 40 degrees, all the way from morning to almost sundown. This hasn't been happening just in Barbados, but this has been happening throughout the Eastern Caribbean, throughout the OECS countries, and actually throughout the Caribbean. So it's not surprising that you would feel like this year is incredibly hot. It is the case. And perhaps the most important factor this year, besides the fact that there's long-term climate change, is that also locally in the North Atlantic Ocean, as you can see on this slide, on the left you see the temperatures at the surface of the ocean last year in September, and on the right you see this year in September. And the darker colors show really where it's warmer this year than it was last year. So you can see around the Caribbean and east of the Caribbean, the temperature has been higher. So to conclude, this year, the temperatures have never been as warm on a day-to-day basis compared to any of the same date of the year in any past year, all the way from the beginning of July. The North Atlantic has been record warm this year. So more heat available means warmer temperature and more humidity, so therefore more heat waves. There's two smaller reasons, and one is related to the Tonga volcanic eruptions very far away in the Pacific island nation of Tonga that happened last year. On top of that, we've also got the situation where the Pacific Ocean is very hot at this time. This is a situation which we call an El Nino event. In the Caribbean, as a consequence, is that we get fewer showers. And with fewer showers come fewer moments where we can get cooling from the very high daytime temperatures, again contributing to the heat. So I hope this was useful and in a way clarifies maybe some of the questions you might have had, like, was it really warm? Why do we feel so warm this year? Is it normal that it's hot this year or around this time of year? And are we really breaking records? The answer, as you know, is yes. Have a wonderful evening and stay cool.
Thank you very much. And now that Dr. Van Meerbeeck has sort of laid the foundation, we will now get into our discussion. And we'll start with Dr. Charles. And Dr. Charles, I have about 3 or 4 questions for you. I'm going to put all of them to you one time, as folks say. You're a doctor, so you can handle that, all right? All right. So we're gonna first look at coping with the heat waves, focusing on the risk. So, Dr. Charles, what health impacts have been observed in Grenada or in the Grenadian communities due to the recent heat waves? That's the first one. What are the risks that individuals face as a result of this heat waves? What health conditions should health workers look out for during the heat waves? And finally, heat waves are among the most dangerous of natural hazards, but rarely receive adequate attention because their death tolls and destruction are not always immediately obvious. Now, of course, you can, ask me the questions over if you miss anything. So it's over to you, Dr. Charles.
Right. Thank you very much. I really do hope that I remember all of those questions. Firstly, certainly it has been very hot and uncomfortable over the past few weeks. Now, as it relates to data on actual or direct health impacts that have been observed from preliminarily looking at our records, for example, as it relates to visits to emergency room. So far, there have not been a change, for example, in the number of persons seeking care as a directly related to or attributed to the higher temperatures. All right. So preliminarily, all right, that there does not appear to be an increased number of persons seeking care, at least at our main hospital, as a result of the heat that we have been experiencing, recently. Now, I say preliminarily because sometimes signals are very small, and sometimes maybe we have to look at maybe another data point, such as maybe mortality or maybe the types of conditions. But as it relates to numbers, so far, the numbers have not changed. Now, exposure to heat is a risk factor for disease. In fact, excessive heat exposure can cause persons to fall very sick. There are individuals that are particularly at risk of suffering illness as a result of heat exposure. This group of individuals includes infants and young children, pregnant women, elderly, persons with underlying health conditions, so persons with chronic diseases such as diabetes, kidney diseases, heart diseases, persons who are differently abled. They are not able to extract themselves from the heat or to take appropriate measures. And that goes the same for very young children as well. They are not able to at least take on the adaptive measures or to adapt to change their behavior to avoid heat exposure. And of course, we have the able-bodied individuals, and this might surprise many persons. We have the able-bodied individuals who work in the open, and they are exposed to the heat. So we have our construction workers, we have all of the categories of individuals who, for some reason or the other, they are exposed, or it could be for very prolonged periods, or especially during the most intense periods of the day when it's very, very hot. I would ask that you repeat questions 2, 3.
Yes, indeed. So the other question was, what are the risks that individuals face as a result of these heat waves? You briefly touched on it, and the other was, what health conditions should health workers look out for during heat waves?
Right. So, I mean, individuals can suffer a different array of illnesses as a result of exposure to heat. From simple muscle cramps that persons who are working hard or exercising hard very aggressively or intensely in the heat, they can experience muscle cramps. And then there are individuals who present with non-specific symptoms such as weakness, feeling faint. These individuals upon exposure to heat, and these individuals may be experiencing what we call heat exhaustion. But then there is the extreme, there's the extreme end of that spectrum where individuals can get very sick, and it is called a heat stroke, where their body has lost its ability to compensate and to deal with the heat that they're exposed to, right? And these individuals can suffer dysfunction of their organs, and these individuals, especially a telltale sign, they have altered mental status, meaning they may be very confused or outright unconscious. They may appear sweaty or not, but at this point, the body has lost the ability to compensate for the excessive amount of heat. So these are the areas that healthcare workers should look for. But especially, they should look for conditions that can be heat-related in the individuals who are most at risk. So sometimes you have to think about it. You have to be, the healthcare worker has to be thinking about it when assessing an individual who may have presented with a non-specific symptom, all right? And it's at this point where healthcare workers must really, ask questions about the living conditions and the potential for being exposed to a very heated environment.
Quickly on that, Dr. Charles, what about mental health? Can excessive heat have any adverse effect on our mental health?
Well, certainly excessive heat is a form of stress, all right? And we know that stress can aggravate, different types of mental conditions, So the excessive heat, yes, can have adverse effects on an individual's mental status, especially if they are unable to extract themselves from the heat, or they are unable to, they just do not have the means to adapt, to remove themselves from that very heated environment.
Okay. Finally, quickly, before we go to Dr. Telesford, heat waves are among the most dangerous of natural hazards, but rarely receive adequate attention because their death tolls and destruction are not always immediately obvious. Your comments?
And that is true, because some of the effects may be delayed, and that's why I said that preliminarily we have not seen, for example, a rise in persons visiting the emergency room. But we have to look at the other data points. We have to look at what is happening in the community. Are we having more, for example, persons who might have ordinarily just had a chronic disease, or someone who might have had who may be elderly, and this person passed away. We have to look at the wider picture. And some of these may be delayed. All right, the data on these may be delayed. So that is, of course, a concern.
Right, wonderful. So let's go to Dr. Telesford. Dr. Telesford, can you reiterate some of the findings from the heat and health study you conducted in Grenada between 2001 for PAHO?
Yes, sure, right. I can. So we did speak about the findings from that study in our previous session, but just to reiterate again, so that study was done in 2021, commissioned by PAHO. And in essence, PAHO wanted to establish a methodology that would be specific to small island states, in this case, particularly the Caribbean, to develop or establish what is called a health impact-based heat threshold. So here we're looking at how or what evidence is there to support the establishment of thresholds, limits that should trigger some kind of action or adaptation in the population. So in essence, that is what PAHO wanted to test. So we looked at several meteorological conditions and sought to determine which ones had effects on the body. So, and also resulting in certain conditions. For example, it could be illness, it could be death, it could also be hospitalization and so. So we tested temperature, relative humidity, vapor pressure. We also looked at wind speed, what is called wet bulb globe temperature, and heat index. Now, the two indices that we found to be of significance were heat index and temperature. Now, temperature is straightforward. Everyone understands temperature, but I think the term heat index, we're less familiar with this term in Grenada. And heat index is what we call feel-like temperature. It is really a measurement of temperature and relative humidity combined. So you would hear, for example, the Met Office announcing or reporting the temperature at a certain level, but then they would indicate it would feel like, and that number is much higher than the actual temperature because the effect of relative humidity is now included, and it makes you feel hotter and very sticky and sweaty, as we say in local terms. So we looked at the relationship between those 6 variables or indices and emergency room visits, that's to the general hospital, hospital admissions, the amount of persons being admitted when the value was at a certain level for each of those, and deaths in Grenada. The data we looked at was from 2014 to 2019. So we looked at a couple of years and tried to determine whether there were any patterns there between those conditions. So what we were looking at was the what we call relative risk, or the increased probability of those outcomes happening when we manipulate the values of the indices, meaning when we increase the temperature, when we look at temperature at 20, let's say 29, and then 30, 31, etc., whether there were any changes in terms of the number of cases related to any of those 3 situations. So that's what we looked at. So we found some things that I would say shocked us, because generally in Grenada, we think that we're accustomed to warm temperatures, apart from what is now happening, in which I think in this period, almost everyone is complaining about the warm weather. But keep in mind, this study was done in 2021, when we were not really receiving alerts, heat wave alerts, and so. So what did we find? With regard to, I'm going to share first heat index. We found a very significant relationship between heat index and those outcomes. Now, when the heat index was at 39 degrees, I bear in mind again, that's the feel-like temperature here, or how warm you will feel, considering heat, temperature, and relative humidity. There was a 300% increase in the relative risk of mortality or death immediately. And remember, we're saying here that we're speaking about the increased probability. So this is what the data showed us. And when the heat index was measured at 41, there was a 400% increase immediately. And at 45, it's 700%. Now, why is that important? Well, currently in Grenada, I was surprised last week, I think it was, to hear the Met Office reporting the feel-like temperature at 39. Now, at the time when we did the study, 39 seemed impossible, right? We went down to test at 35 because we thought this better reflected the conditions in Grenada. Now we are experiencing 39, and the results indicate there is a 300% increase in relative risk of death, as well as hospitalization. There was a 100% increase up to a 200% increase at 49 heat index. Now, Dr. Charles made a very important point in that he said that they have not seen any change, and as he said, it's preliminary, in terms of the persons seeking care. And that's correct, because our data also showed that. So the data, we did not find a significant relationship, if you will, between emergency room visits and heat index. The problem really was in hospitalization. So after 6 days, the ministry should see an increase in the amount of persons being hospitalized. So the severity of the illness really, and then deaths as well. So this is what the data is indicating. Now, just to say that the greatest impact, as we see, because the model that we use, or the software that we use, indicated both the relative risk as well as the time when you would expect to see that change happening. And the impact was greatest for death immediately after the event. So like 1 to 2 days after, the risk tend to increase. Whereas for hospitalization, generally about 6 days after the event, you're likely to, the risk is greater at that point. Okay? For temperature, it is a bit lower. Again, temperature is standalone here. So not considering relative humidity, however, there was still at 29 degrees, 30 degrees, and 33 degrees. Now, in recent times, we have heard the Met Office reporting temperatures that are, as Dr. Van Meerbeeck said, unusual. So we've noticed now temperatures at 32.2. In June, between the period 1991 and 2020, that's a 30-year reference period. In June of the average temperature in June over that period for all months of June during that over a 30-year period, the average was 30.6. In 2023 alone, we had in June temperatures up to 32.2 degrees Celsius, a 2-degree at least, almost there, increase, and an average of 30.9, from 30.6 to 30.9. But we had maximum 32.2. In July, we had 30.7 during the reference period. That was the average. In July of 2023, this year, we went up to 32.4, even higher than the max in June of this year. And the average temperature in July was 31.1, whereas it was 30.7 in July over the reference period. In August, the average for the reference period was 31.0. In August of this year, and there is this upward trajectory, it went up to 32.9. We did experience that temperature here in Grenada, and the average in August was 31.6. So you see an upward pattern here. In September, over this period, the maximum temperature was, average temperature was 31.3. Today, the 27th of September, already we have seen temperatures at 32.7 maximum, right? And an average of 32. So in June, 30.9 average max. In July, 31.1. In August, 31.6. And in September, 32 degrees. So we're seeing a constant upward trajectory in terms of temperature here in Grenada. So the study intended to establish thresholds to trigger alerts so that the population can take the necessary steps to protect themselves.
Right. Quickly, Dr. Telesford, with all that you've said, this is alarming. My final question to you now, just for this point, actually, which are the most vulnerable populations to these adverse impacts in Grenada?
I think Dr. Charles summed it up very well. And he spoke about all of the populations that we consider as vulnerable. And it ranges from children. I remember Dr. Van Meerbeeck speaking about children in schools. Their learning ability was decreased significantly when they were exposed to high temperature. So I remember that. So we're talking here about small children to elderly people. in particular, persons above the age of 60 years, persons that have underlying conditions. And I think Dr. Charles summed it up very well, because heat impacts the entire physiology of the body. It impacts all of the organs, how they function, and puts the body under extreme stress. So it is dangerous for elderly people, for children, to be exposed to those conditions. Now, we also have to think about outdoor workers, and that's why we have Dr. Winchester on with us today. I'm not going to speak too much about what she's planning, but in essence, every person, every demographic group that you can think about by age here, heat is dangerous for them. Pregnant women as well. I'm not sure if Dr. Charles had mentioned that, maybe he did, but it is also very dangerous for pregnant women to be exposed to those kind of temperatures.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Telesford. Dr. Charles, quickly, what programs are in place to cope with the health risk from these heat waves, including guidance of different types of activities?
Right. So what is recommended are what we call common sense measures. And these are what are recommended to address this situation. The Ministry of Health, our role is to, in addition to providing care for persons who become acutely ill, but at least to educate and advise individuals on measures that can be taken to protect themselves. Now, it is important that as best as possible, persons avoid exposure to excessive heat. Now, it is worth mentioning that given that climate change is making these conditions more frequent, then it means that our country as a whole needs to adapt. All right? We need to adapt probably the way we build and what measures that we can take within each family to ensure that we can at least deal with a heated environment, right? And what we advise individuals who are exposed to heat, firstly, heat can cause dehydration, and this can happen very quickly in environments where the humidity is high. Now, humidity in Grenada generally ranges between averages maybe around the 70s, all right, 70, maybe even as high as 75%. Now, as the humidity increases, it becomes increasingly difficult for sweat to evaporate and cool the body. So individuals may lose a lot of fluids and become dehydrated. So persons who are exposed to heat, they need to ensure that they are hydrated. Persons who have to work in a heated environment need to ensure that they are taking frequent breaks in addition to staying hydrated. And persons who are doing very heavy work in this heated environment, water alone is not sufficient to hydrate these individuals, because in addition to losing water in sweat, they are losing substances that we call electrolytes, principal among them being sodium. All right, so these individuals, they cannot replace all of the fluids that they're losing by just drinking water. We encourage the use of liquids like oral rehydration salts, or there are different sports drinks that are really solutions that contain a bit of sodium in them that will allow for the replenishment. So these are some of the common sense measures. For persons who are differently abled, for young children, we have to ensure that we dress them appropriately because they are unable to, adopt behaviors to protect themselves. However you dress a baby, that is how the baby is going to remain for the day until change. If you dress that baby for very warm weather, and they're exposed to high heat. All right, their bodies are not able to dissipate this heat. They heat up very quickly and they lose heat a bit slower. The same for individuals who are, like I said, differently abled. We have to look out for all of these individuals, ensure that they're not overly exposed, continue to check on them, ensure that they are hydrated. And these are all measures that we recommend that individuals can take to deal with all of this heated environment that we're exposed to at present.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Charles. We're coming up to next commercial break, but before we do that, and of course we'll be opening our telephone lines in a bit, but before we do that, let's go to Dr. Winchester. She's been sitting there and taking in all the information, probably feeling lonely. So, Dr. Winchester, we know that you're working on a project that specifically addresses the risk for these heat waves. We know that you also have a symposium to build on the research that Dr. Telesford conducted. What do you hope to achieve from the symposium and other fellowship activities? Share with us, please.
Okay, thank you. So good evening again to our listeners. So as a climate change health leader, my goal with this symposium would be to really initiate a course of action or initiation, that conversation among different participants. And so these would be participants from different professional backgrounds. And so basically I'm creating a network or community where persons from these different professional backgrounds can make recommendations. So we want practical and realistic heat adaptation recommendations that would be most suitable to the Grenadian context. And the goal with these recommendations or adaptation measures would be obviously to protect the health of humans and animals that are exposed to these heat temperatures. As far as some of the other fellowship activities, we will be doing a pilot survey. And so basically, the aim is to gain first-hand experience from persons in these different demographic backgrounds. So the elderly, the children, pregnant women. We really want to know what are they experiencing from this increased heat exposure. And so some of the categories we want to get information is as far as their psychological impacts, like how are they coping with their daily activities during heat exposure? How are they coping feeling hotter, sweating more? Are they indeed doing the common sense measures that Dr. Charles alluded to by drinking more water? Even their social interactions, are you able to still participate in the social activities that you once enjoyed? And then occupational, how are you coping in work, especially if you work outdoors? Or is it that one of our recommended measures should be so that employers should have employees on maybe light duty in the event of a heat wave? So basically, even economic impacts of heat exposure, as in if it is you're unable to work and earn, how are you facing the increase or able to provide, let's say, food and the gas prices for your families? So all of these negative impacts that result from us being exposed to extreme heat or the extreme temperatures. And so based on the feedback from this symposium and based on the responses from different participants throughout Grenada, we're hoping to create a policy or a brief that would have all the different heat adaptation measures that were recommended that would be most applicable to Grenada. And so generally, we're aiming to strengthen Grenada's resilience to cope with the extreme temperatures that are being experienced.
Okay. When do you hope to roll that symposium out? When can the public get, or it's not for, tell us about that. Anytime soon?
All right. So, yeah, it's okay. So the symposium, we're looking at having the first symposium in November of this year. But however, like I mentioned, we're just going to have certain stakeholders or participants. We're going to invite specific participants, which would be persons from different professional backgrounds, so different ministries. So like, of course, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Climate Resilience. So we're going to have some key persons just to have a very panel discussion and put them in groups to really get some of their general recommendation based on their professional knowledge and background and experience in their line of work. We want to know what do they think are some of the recommended or recommendations to enable the different groups or the different demographic groups to cope with heat stress. So we're looking at the end of November, and I'm still in the stages of developing how I would go about the project. And so in the end, we're looking tentatively at next year, early next year, to have that second symposium to present our findings from the survey and the project. And hopefully we could also include some persons from the general public in that second symposium. Very preliminary event, but it's really just stimulating that conversation. We're getting the conversation started because climate change is everyone's business, and so we need to get that input and participation from all of us because we're all affected.
Yes, we are. Thank you very much, Dr. Winchester. So what we do now is take a short break. When we come back, we'll open the telephone lines and allow you, our listeners and viewers, to ask your questions. We have a 10-minute period allocated for that. You can ask questions or make your contributions to the program. Stay with us. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
Our environment is our responsibility. Budget Marine contributes by selling environmentally friendly products. For example, we sell lightweight open boats that require a relatively small engine. Best to combine with our Tohatsu 4-stroke engines. They use little fuel and have a low emission. Carib Marine solar panels are specially made to withstand the Caribbean climate. The panels are suitable for use at home and on the boat. The required chargers and converters are also available from Budget Marine. Keeping your car and boat clean extends the lifespan. But residues of the cleaning products disappear in nature. We at Budget Marine sell eco-friendly cleaning products from EcoWorks, not harmful to nature and also clean very well. Plastic junk in our oceans is a major problem. Fortunately, there are companies that clean up and reuse the plastic into usable products. Marlowe, manufacturer of lines and ropes, produces docking lines made out of plastic waste. Another company is Sperry Shoes. Sperry has a collection made from used fabrics and plastic waste. Just a few examples of how we at Budget Marine contribute to help protecting our environment. We care.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. We're going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
But when you need someone to help you to your feet, I'll be that beacon to your highest peak. Oh, I'll be right next to you, no, I will never leave. Come on, take my hands, we got everything we need. Cause you can look to me, yes, I can. Whenever you're in need, just call on me and I'll be on my way. I'll be by your side, never to divide, the light that shines our way. Wherever your road leads, we'll be right there with you. Wherever your road leads, we'll make your dreams come true. Next time, next time, next time.
Lexa Credit Union, with you wherever your road leads.
Welcome back, everyone. It's the first program of season 2 of our climate reality, and we're looking at coping with the heat waves, the risks and the responses. Of course, looking at how we can, deal with it. And you heard from Dr. Van Meerbeeck earlier, laying the foundation nicely, explaining what is happening and, how long it may continue for. So our telephone line is open. The number is 440-1252. If you have any questions that you would like to ask regarding the discussion, you can do so now. The telephone number again, 440-1252. The number is on the screen, so those of you looking, it's there, 440-1252. While we wait on the calls, I would like to go back to Dr. Telesford for a bit. Dr. Telesford, based on the studies and so that was done, what thresholds would you recommend for Grenada in light of the reported temperatures and the heat alerts by NADMA?
That's a very good question, but we did follow in the study included in the report some recommended thresholds. So what we are recommending for Grenada is a 3-tiered warning system. Now, in some countries, people experience what is called warning fatigue. So the minute there is an increase, then your warning is sort of reflective of an excessive condition or extremely bad condition. So to avoid that, now after a while, people don't bother when you would put out those kind of alerts or warning. So what we are recommending is a 3-tiered system. One at when the heat index is between 35 and 38, we suggest or recommend that a caution alert be made. And in that case, outdoor workers may need to drink more water, wear loose-fitting clothing, take cool baths during the day, etc. People in general, but in particular, outdoor workers would need to take some more steps, take short breaks between walking outdoor and so. Now, so that's caution.
Right.
We recommend
Dr. Telesford, just before you go to the other one, we have a caller on the line. Sorry, caller. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Augustine, and greetings to your panelists there. Listen, this is a very, very, very interesting program, I must indeed say, and I congratulate you on its production. Sometimes, when I listen to these conversations, I wonder: is there a problem in this world? Climate change, or is it really the heating of the global heating? I wonder why they do that if it was just to dilute the real problem that we're facing. But beside that, I listened to Dr. Charles, very, very, very important information, and Dr. Telesford. And I recall a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to a program in Europe where they were analyzing the mortality in Europe, especially around the Aegean, Greece, and that area and so on. And just as Dr. Telesford said, and they highlighted it, in addition to the extreme temperature, there was the issue of humidity. And they even went beyond, which they found out to seriously exacerbate the mortality rate was that of air pollution. I say that to ask Dr. Charles. Dr. Charles, I would like to know what the government of Grenada, through your ministry, because we suffer a major problem in this here country, night and day, in addition to all this heat. People burning coals around villages, they're burning nylon, panty, They're burning all kind of crates, plastic. You can smell the chemical products in what they burn. What can be done to alleviate this problem? Because this, in effect, is exacerbating the situation of our health problem in this here country.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Charles?
A very important topic as it relates to air pollution. Well, I must say that this is not one of the areas that we do well at monitoring here locally. And I think with increased advocacy from the public, I think this is one of the areas that we can bring to the fore. And to address it, it would have to be from a higher policy and legislation point of view. I think this is where if any intervention would be taken to address this, it would be at this level. But like I say, it is not one of the areas, honestly, it is not one of the areas where we do a lot of work as it relates to monitoring. And of course, it is a valid issue. And I mean, we know from reports in other nations, in other jurisdictions, that air pollution is a significant factor and a significant contributor to morbidity and to mortality, to disease and death. So I think, like I say, it's advocacy, and it would have to be addressed at a policy level, at least here in Grenada.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. And quickly, the implications for school children. Referring to the heat waves and so that we're having.
Yeah, well, obviously, it would be difficult for children to sit and concentrate in a very hot and humid classroom. And if they are not able to sit and concentrate, then it would be equally difficult for them to internalize the information that they're being given and for them to be able to apply it later on. So in that setting, it will make learning challenging, right? And this could be a direct and indirect impact of all of this heat that we're experiencing.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. I just want to go back to Dr. Telesford finally, because we almost out of time, and I'm begging my technical operators for extra 5 minutes, please. Dr. Telesford, you were telling us about the caution alerts. You gave us one. Can you just quickly tell us the other two?
Yes. So we spoke about 35 to 38. Now, interestingly, in Grenada, as I said, the Met Office is now reporting 39. So 39 to 40, there should be an extreme caution alert. That's what we're recommending. And even without an alert being issued per se in Grenada, I think we've been receiving some information from NADMA. But I think people or the residents need to take those more seriously, right? We hear of many complaints of people feeling ill, not feeling well. I heard of outdoor workers saying, look, we just can't function in this heat. So there should really be an extreme caution alert. That's what we're recommending for the entire country. And there are some steps that should be taken at that point. The health system should also be on alert for persons coming in not feeling well and so. And the final one is 41 to 45. I'm hoping we really do not get there, but my outlook, Godfrey, for 2024 is not one that is too hopeful. I think from what we saw this year between June and August already, in 2024, I think we would definitely need to be better prepared for this at the national level. I expect it will continue in that direction.
Thank you, Dr. Telesford. And folks, what a pity, but we're out of time. But just before we wrap, it is now time for our key takeaway from this evening's program. And we'd ask all of our guests to take a minute and share with us the key takeaway from this program. And we'd go back to, well, let's start with Dr. Nyoni first, because was said the last shall be first and the first shall be last. So Dr. Winchester, your key takeaway from this evening's program. Yes, we
Thank
think
you.
Right.
My take-home message would be simple. You know, climate change is real. Climate change is everyone's business. And so we all have a role to play towards protecting our health, protecting our livelihoods, so that we could withstand the negative effects which we've listed out tonight towards climate change and towards being exposed to these extreme temperatures.
Thank you very much. Dr. Telesford, your key takeaway from tonight's program?
Yes, so again, I want to encourage the residents of this country to take climate change seriously. And also, we need to take a stand in terms of some heat thresholds, some actions to, affirmative actions to protect our population. And I want to ask our people to please support advocacy for action, and whatever interventions are being put in place, that we adhere to those as well.
Thank you. Dr. Charles, your key takeaway.
So, I mean, this, extreme heat that we're experiencing, it is one of the many impacts that we can expect to face as it relates to climate change. And, we must all be mindful as it relates to protecting yourself from all of this heat that we're having. Firstly, avoid, if you can avoid exposure to the heat, that would be ideal. Ensure that you stay hydrated, right? And ensure that you are looking out for those who are unable to look out for themselves. Right? That's those vulnerable people who are unable to adopt the behaviors to protect themselves. Make sure you are looking out for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles. And of course, to you all, our guests, thank you very much for appearing on our first of season 2 in Our Climate Reality. Before we go, I would just like to extend special thanks to some very important people who continue to work with us to make this program possible. Of course, Mr. Leon Charles, who plays a vital role in the whole production and structuring of this program, Dr. Spencer Thomas, Ms. Martina Duncan, and also special thanks to Ms. J. Belma from Barbados. Also special thanks to our partners making this program possible: Republic Bank, Classic Lighting, Spice Isle Imaging, and Budget Marine. We thank you very much. To you, our listeners and viewers, we thank you for staying with us, and we trust that you were able to take something away from this program. Climate change is real. It is here. We must act now. Have a good night.
Our Climate Reality is made possible by Republic Bank. We're the one for you. Classic Lighting, Budget Marine Grenada, and Spice Isle Imaging Center.
Our environment is our responsibility. Budget Marine contributes by selling environmentally friendly products. For example, we sell lightweight open boats that require a relatively small engine. Best to combine with our Tohatsu 4-stroke engines. They use little fuel and have a low